They say that in the Philippines, you can still find a love untouched by the modern world, a conservative girl who values family above everything else. I believed in that. I believed in it so much that I traded my luxury life in Berlin for a $10 guest house in a village where nobody goes. But there is a secret about the good girls of the province that nobody tells you. A secret that costs 4 hours of dust, thousands of euros, and a broken heart to uncover. This is a secret.
The winter in Berlin didn't just freeze the ground, it seemed to freeze the soul. For Hans, a 40-year-old structural engineer, life was a series of gray blueprints, cold commutes, and the hollow echo of a meticulously clean apartment in Charlottenburg. He had spent his youth building bridges and skyscrapers, yet he had failed to build a single meaningful connection. In the silence of his showroom-style living room, the only warmth came from the blue light of his smartphone. It started on a lonely Tuesday, past midnight. Hans was scrolling through a social media app when he saw her. A flash of color, a rhythmic K-pop beat, and a smile that seemed to cut through the German frost. Her name was Maria. She was 18, dancing in a humble room with bamboo walls somewhere on an island called Bohol. Hans was a man of logic, but that night, logic failed him. He sent a message, never expecting a reply. 10 minutes later, his phone vibrated. "Hello, Hans from Berlin. Is it true that people there don't smile at strangers?" I should have seen the signs then.
I should have asked why a girl with 50,000 followers replied to a middle-aged man in seconds, but I was blinded. I didn't realize that in the Philippines, a conservative girl can be your greatest dream during the day and your most expensive nightmare once the sun goes down. I was about to trade my career and my dignity for a girl who was playing a game I didn't even know existed.
Over the next 2 months, their communication became a daily ritual. Every morning, Hans woke up to a "Good morning, my Hans" photo. It was never a provocative shot. It was Maria helping her mother cook rice, Maria holding a Bible, or Maria wearing a modest school uniform. She was the Dalagang Bukid, the traditional, untouched village girl. Hans didn't just fall for Maria, he fell for the idea of her. In his mind, he was flying to Bohol to pick up his beautiful girlfriend and take her to the 5-star resort he had already paid for in Panglao. He imagined candlelit dinners by the pool and waking up together with the sound of the ocean. He packed his bags with a heart full of Western expectations. He had no reason to think anything would go differently. When Hans landed at the Bohol Panglao International Airport, the tropical heat felt like a welcome embrace. He checked into his luxury suite, looked at the king-sized bed, and sent Maria his location. "I'm here, my angel. I'll pay for your bus or jeepney ticket. Just come to Panglao. I can't wait to hold you." The reply was a bucket of ice water over his head. "Hans, I cannot go there. My father is very strict. He does not know I am talking to a foreigner. If I take the bus to a tourist place like Panglao alone, my reputation is finished. My neighbors will talk. If you want to see me, you must come to our house in Trinidad." Hans sat on the edge of his expensive bed, staring at the message. The romantic fantasy of the last 2 months shattered instantly. He felt a flash of anger, but then a strange sense of respect took over. "She's real," he whispered to himself. "She's not like the others who just want to party in resorts." The next morning, he rented a scooter. He didn't want to wait. He wanted to prove his devotion. The 4-hour journey from the south of Bohol to the remote north was a descent into a world he didn't know existed. The air-conditioned dreams of Berlin were replaced by the brutal reality of the Philippine sun. For 150 kilometers, Hans fought the road. He was overtaken by massive, smoke-belching trucks that left him blinded in clouds of black soot. The fine red dust of the province coated his expensive clothes, turning his skin into a sandpaper mask. His back ached, his hands cramped from the vibration of the handlebars, and his thirst was a constant burning itch. By the time he reached the small town of Trinidad, he was unrecognizable. He was a sweating, red-faced, dust-covered foreigner on a tiny bike. The house was humble, bamboo walls and a tin roof. As he pulled into the yard, the entire family emerged. They didn't look like the sophisticated people from the city. They looked at Hans with wide, open-mouthed wonder. To them, he was a giant from another planet. They were shy, stepping back as he approached, whispering to each other in Bisaya with curious smiles. Maria stepped out last. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, and her hair was tied back. She looked at his dusty face and her eyes welled up with tears. "Hans, you really came," she whispered. He sat on a plastic chair in their living room, surrounded by her parents and curious cousins. They offered him a glass of warm water and watched his every move as if he were a celebrity. After an hour of broken English and shy laughter, the father gave a small nod. They were allowed to go to the waterfall nearby. The ride to Kawasan Falls in Trinidad was short, maybe 40 minutes, but after the morning's marathon, it felt like a dream. At the waterfall, Hans watched Maria. Even in the water, she stayed in her clothes, laughing as the spray hit her. She was the picture of innocence he had traveled halfway around the world to find. But as the sun began to set, the reality hit again. "Hans, you must go," she said, her voice soft but firm. "My father, he says I must be home before dark." He dropped her off, received a chaste peck on the cheek, and turned his bike around. He had another 4 hours of riding ahead of him, this time in the pitch black, dodging stray dogs and unlit trucks on the dangerous highway. As he rode through the night, his eyes stinging from the wind, Hans made a decision. He couldn't keep doing this 8-hour round trip. If he wanted to win her, he had to leave his luxury life behind. He had to move to the village.
Hans returned to Panglao that night a broken man, but his mind was racing. The luxury of the resort now felt like a cage of gold. Every time he looked at the white linens of his bed, he saw the red dust of Trinidad. By Thursday, he had already decided. He was going back, and this time he wasn't leaving by sunset. The second trip was just as brutal as the first, 4 hours of dodging trucks and swallowing gravel, but the reward felt greater. This time when he arrived, the family welcomed him like an old friend. The children no longer hid, they ran to the gate, shouting, "Hans, Hans!" The father even offered him a piece of dried fish, which Hans swallowed with a polite, forced smile. "Today we go to the caves," Maria said, her eyes bright. They rode deeper into the hills. The caves were hidden behind thick curtains of tropical vines, cool and damp inside. In the flickering light of a rented flashlight, the world felt intimate and private. For the first time, Hans felt like they were alone. He reached for her hand and she let him hold it, her skin cool against his. He leaned in, the silence of the cave amplifying his heartbeat. He moved to kiss her, but she turned her head at the last second. "Not here, Hans," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The spirits are watching, and if my neighbor's here, I will be in trouble. I am a good girl, remember?" Instead of frustration, Hans felt a deep, obsessive respect. He convinced himself that her boundaries were a sign of her rare character. On the ride back to her house, the heat and the fatigue finally caught up to him. He realized he couldn't face the 4-hour journey back to Panglao in the dark again. He looked at the humble town of Trinidad, a cluster of small shops, a church, and a few dusty streets. It was light years away from Berlin, but it was where she was. "Maria," he said as they stood by her gate, "I am staying. I'm not going back to the resort. I want to find a room here, in town." Maria looked surprised, almost hesitant for a second, but then she smiled. "Really? You would stay here, in our village? It is very simple life, Hans." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the town. There were no hotels or bed and breakfasts listed on any website. They walked from house to house, Maria asking in Bisaya if anyone had a room for rent. Finally, they found it. a concrete guest house above a small hardware store. It was a brutalist box with a single window that looked out onto a rusted tin roof. The walls were bare, painted a hospital green. The bed was a thin foam mattress on a wooden frame, and the bathroom was a bucket of cold water and a plastic dipper. "It's $10 a night," Maria said, looking at him. "It's expensive for Trinidad, Hans. Are you sure?" Hans looked at the humming, rusty electric fan in the corner and the mosquito net hanging from the ceiling. He looked at Maria, who was watching him with wide eyes. "It's fine, as long as I am near you." He checked out of his 5-star resort the next morning, leaving behind the infinity pool and the gourmet breakfast. He packed his high-end luggage onto the back of his scooter and rode back to the north. That evening, Hans sat on the edge of his foam mattress. The air in the room was thick and didn't move, despite the fan rattling on the table. Outside, the sound of a nearby karaoke bar blasted a distorted version of a 90s love song, and the smell of roasting pork drifted through the open window. His skin felt tight from the sun, and his expensive Berlin clothes felt out of place in this concrete box. But as he looked at a text from Maria saying, "Sleep well, my Hans. I am so happy you are close," he felt a strange sense of peace. He was no longer a tourist. He was part of her world now. He was exactly where he wanted to be. The next 2 weeks in Trinidad were a test of Hans's patience. Life in the village moved at a glacial pace. Hans spent most of his days on the wooden bench outside Maria's house, swatting mosquitoes and watching the neighbors' goats. He was happy, but he was observant. He noticed that Maria spent hours trying to record her dance videos and lifestyle clips for her social media. She would prop her cracked ancient phone against a stack of old books, but the result was always a blurry, grainy mess. The phone would overheat and shut down every 20 minutes, and the dim light inside the bamboo house made everything look dark and unprofessional. "Hans, it's so frustrating," she complained one afternoon, showing him a video where her face was just a dark shadow. "I want to make good content, but I have nothing. It's hard to do anything with this phone." Hans saw her social media as a harmless hobby, a way for her to feel connected to the world outside the village. For a man who had spent his career fixing structural flaws, this was a problem with a simple solution. He wanted her to have the tools she needed to do what she liked. "We're going to Tubigon tomorrow," Hans announced. "I'm tired of seeing you fight with that piece of junk." The trip to Tubigon was loud and dusty. In the electronics store, Hans didn't look at the budget models. He pointed to the top-tier iPhone Pro, the one with the best camera, he told the clerk. But as an engineer, he knew the camera was only half the battle. He remembered the shadows in Maria's room. He spotted a large professional-grade LED ring light on a telescopic tripod. "And that," he added, "you need proper light if you want it to look right." The ride back was different. Maria clutched the heavy boxes to her chest as they rode the scooter back to the village. When they reached the house, Hans immediately went to work. He spent hours in her small bedroom, carefully assembling the tripod and managing the cables. He positioned the ring light so it would catch her eyes without creating harsh shadows. When he finally turned it on, the transformation was staggering. The humble bamboo walls seemed to glow, and Maria, standing in the center of the light, looked perfectly clear on the new screen. "Try it," Hans said, feeling a surge of pride in his work. Maria took a video, and the clarity was so sharp she gasped. "Hans, it looks amazing. I look so clear. Thank you so much." "Now you can make your videos properly," he said. "Thank you, Hans," she whispered, her eyes already fixed on the settings of the new phone. "I'm going to stay up late and figure out how everything works. I want to test all the features. You should go back to the guest house now. The heat was very strong today, and you look like you need some rest." Hans felt the exhaustion in his muscles. The heat and the long ride to Tubigon had drained him. He kissed her forehead, said goodnight to her parents, and walked back to his concrete room, listening to the crickets. He fell asleep feeling satisfied, knowing he had supported her and made her happy. The week following the trip to Tubigon was surprisingly quiet. Maria was often busy learning the new technology in her room, and Hans, wanting to give her space to enjoy her new gifts, spent more time reading on his porch or walking through the village market. He felt like a man who had successfully invested in his partner's happiness. On Thursday night, The humidity in Trinidad was unbearable. Hans lay on his foam mattress, the stagnant air pressing down on him. The rusty fan in the corner of his room was doing nothing but moving the heat around. Around 1:30 a.m., he reached for his water bottle, only to find it bone dry. Then he remembered. His high-end insulated hiking flask was still sitting on the wooden table in Maria's kitchen. He had forgotten it there after dinner. "The walk will do me good," he muttered, pulling on his shoes. "Maybe the night air is cooler." The village was dead silent, the only sound the crunch of his boots on the gravel. As he approached Maria's house, he noticed something strange. The entire house was dark, but a powerful, cold white glow was bleeding through the cracks of the window in Maria's bedroom. It was the ring light. Hans crept toward the side of the house, his heart beating with a strange mix of affection and curiosity, and peered through a small gap in the window frame. Maria was sitting on the edge of her bed, perfectly positioned in the center of that clinical white halo. She looked exactly like the girl he loved, modest, soft-spoken, and incredibly shy. She was holding the iPhone Pro he had bought her, her face tilted in that innocent way she always had. She was on a video call. "Yes, my love, I miss you every single day," she whispered into the phone in her usual sweet, broken English. She looked down, playing with a strand of her hair, exactly the way she did when she was embarrassed in front of Hans. "It is so hard being here in the village without you. I am just waiting for the day we can finally be together. You are the only one in my heart, I promise." Hans stood frozen in the red dust. He heard her thank the man on the other end, some guy with a thick Australian accent, for a money transfer he had sent earlier that day. They talked for about 5 minutes. She was telling him about how she had to skip lunch today because her family was struggling, and how his gift was a miracle from God. She promised him she was staying home and praying for their future. Every word she said was a mirror of the things she told Hans. He watched her for 10 minutes, his body going numb. He was watching a master at work. She knew exactly when to pause for dramatic effect and when to flash a shy smile. She finished the call with a lingering kiss to the camera, her eyes looking misty and full of fake devotion. But before Hans could even step back, the phone buzzed again. Another call. Maria didn't look surprised. She checked the screen, took a deep breath, and her expression shifted slightly. The deeply in love look faded, replaced by a more professional, apologetic mask. She swiped to answer, and her voice immediately became soft and pleading. "Oh, hi. I am so sorry I didn't answer your messages this morning," she said, her voice dripping with artificial regret. On the other end, a man's voice, older, American, was speaking loudly. He sounded frustrated, asking why she had been silent after he sent the money. "Please, don't be angry with me," Maria interrupted gently, her eyes wide and innocent in the bright light. "The signal in the village today was so bad. I tried to call you many times, but it just wouldn't connect. I felt so sad because I couldn't talk to you. I saw the money you sent through Western Union. Thank you so much. You are so kind to help my family like this. You know I would never ignore you on purpose." She spent the next few minutes soothing him, expertly stroking his ego while thanking him again and again for the transfer. She made him feel like he was her savior, the only one she could rely on. There was no aggression, no shouting, just a calm, polite, and extremely effective manipulation. She justified her silence so convincingly that the man on the other end began to apologize for being frustrated with her. "Yes, I will send you a special video tomorrow morning, I promise. I have to go now. My mom is calling me, but I will dream of you. Thank you again for being my hero." As soon as she hung up, her face went neutral. She didn't look happy or sad. She looked like a clerk who had just finished a long shift at a bank. She checked her balance on a banking app, her fingers moving quickly over the screen Hans had paid for, and then she began typing a message to a third person. Hans stood in the darkness, looking at the technical perfection of her setup. He realized he hadn't helped a girl with a hobby. He had provided a high-definition upgrade for a business. The thirst that had brought him here was gone. He didn't want the flask. He just turned around and walked back toward the road, the white glow of the lamp still burning in his mind like a brand. The first pale light of dawn was beginning to touch the rice field when Hans returned to his room. He didn't pack with the frantic energy of a betrayed man. He moved with the slow, mechanical precision of an engineer dismantling a failed project. There was no point in a confrontation. There would be no screaming matches, no demands for refunds, and no dramatic exits. He knew exactly what would happen if he stayed. In 2 hours, she would arrive at his door with her hair in a modest ponytail, wearing her simplest dress and looking at him with those pure eyes while asking for breakfast money. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, the silence of the village ringing in his ears. The image of her bedroom stayed with him, etched into his mind with clinical clarity. I will never forget the expression on her face under the light of that lamp, he thought, as he latched his suitcase. She was so incredibly beautiful in that glow, radiant and perfect, but there was absolutely nothing good behind it. He realized then that the beauty he had admired was just another tool, as cold and functional as the tripod he had assembled for her. She was a masterpiece of deception, and he had been the one to provide the high-definition lighting for his own ruin. Hans walked out of the guest house before the village fully awoke. He didn't leave a note. As the first bus to the port pulled away, throwing up a cloud of red dust, he looked back one last time. He left the iPhone and the ring light behind, a permanent gift to the workstation he had built. Let that cold white light shine on the next hero who came looking for a shy girl in a quiet village.